Admiral Kethvari stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Times Eternal Victory **. The massive ship was over 3 kilometers long and packed with enough firepower to destroy small moons. Around him, 9,499 other warships waited in perfect formation. This was the third Grand Fleet of the Zelathi hegemony, the largest military force ever assembled for a single conquest. The admiral looked at the holographic display showing their target. Sol 3, also called Earth by its inhabitants. A small blue world orbiting a yellow star. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, covered in white clouds and blue oceans. It was hard to believe that such a pretty world would soon belong to the hegemony. "Admiral, the final intelligence reports are ready," said Commander Yethka, his second-in-command. She handed him a datapad filled with information about Earth and its people. Kethvari read through the report carefully. The humans were a young species that had only recently discovered nuclear energy. Their space technology was laughably primitive. Their fastest ships took months to travel between planets in their own solar system. The hegemony's ships could cross that same distance in minutes. The humans had never encountered alien life. They spent most of their time fighting each other in small wars over resources and territory. Their planet was divided into nearly 200 separate nations that could barely cooperate on anything. Some of these nations had nuclear weapons, but they were crude devices compared to Zelathi technology. "Look at this," Kethvari said to his officers, pointing at images of human spacecraft. "They still use chemical rockets. Their largest warship is smaller than one of our shuttles. They have no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light travel. This will be the easiest conquest in hegemony history." The other officers laughed. In 3,000 years, the hegemony had conquered 847 worlds. They had faced energy beings, hive minds, and species with natural psychic powers. None had lasted more than a few weeks against hegemony forces. Earth would fall in days. The intelligence report showed that humans had about 8 billion individuals on their planet. Most lived in large cities that would be easy targets. Their governments were weak and often changed leadership through something called elections. Their military forces were scattered across hundreds of different organizations that rarely worked together. "Sir, why are we using the entire Third Fleet for this operation?" asked a young tactical officer. "Surely a few hundred ships would be enough." Kethvari smiled. The young officer didn't understand hegemony strategy. "We use overwhelming force to prevent unnecessary casualties," he explained. "When the humans see 9,500 warships in their sky, they will surrender immediately. No one will die. This is the civilized way to conduct conquest." The admiral walked to the large viewing window. Space around them was filled with hegemony ships as far as he could see. Massive dreadnoughts bristled with weapons. Fast attack cruisers moved in precise formations. Support vessels carried landing troops and occupation equipment. Every ship was a masterpiece of Zelathi engineering, built to last for centuries and equipped with technology that seemed like magic to primitive species. Kethvari had brought his young son, Dethvar, to observe this conquest. It would be the boy's first time seeing the hegemony's power in action. The admiral wanted his son to understand how their empire maintained peace and order throughout the galaxy. Sometimes, overwhelming force was the most merciful option. "Father," Dethvar asked, "what if the humans refuse to surrender?" "They won't," Kethvari replied confidently. "No species has ever been foolish enough to fight against impossible odds. The humans may be primitive, but they're not stupid. When they see our fleet, their leaders will realize that resistance is pointless." The tactical display showed Earth's defensive capabilities. The humans had a few hundred small spacecraft scattered throughout their solar system. Most were research vessels or cargo ships. Their military had some armed satellites around Earth, but these were designed to fight other humans, not alien invaders. The entire human space force couldn't damage a single hegemony destroyer. "Admiral, we're receiving a message from High Command," announced the communications officer. The image of Supreme Admiral Jektar appeared on the main screen. The elderly Zelathi's scales had the deep purple color that came with age and wisdom. "Admiral Kethvari, You are authorized to begin the conquest of Sol 3. Remember the hegemony's principles: swift victory, minimal casualties, and quick integration of new worlds into our empire. Understood, Supreme Admiral, Kethvari replied. We will follow standard protocols. The humans will be given one opportunity to surrender before we begin military operations. Excellent. The Council expects your victory report within 7 standard days. The mineral surveys show that Earth has valuable resources. We need this world productive as soon as possible. The transmission ended. Around the bridge, officers began preparing for the final jump to Earth's solar system. The hyperspace generators hummed with power. Navigation computers calculated the exact coordinates. Weapon systems ran final diagnostics. Kethvari looked at the intelligence report one more time. The humans seemed like an interesting species despite their primitive nature. They had created art, music, and literature. Their cities were beautiful in their own chaotic way. Their technology was crude but showed creativity. Once they joined the hegemony, human culture would be preserved and studied. All ships report ready for hyperspace jump, announced the navigation officer. Begin the operation, Kethvari ordered. Space around the fleet twisted and folded. Stars stretched into lines of light. The massive hegemony armada disappeared from the galaxy's edge and began its journey toward Earth. In a few hours, they would arrive at humanity's doorstep with enough firepower to shatter continents. The Admiral felt satisfied with the mission ahead. Soon, Earth would be another peaceful world in the hegemony's vast empire. The humans would benefit from Zalathi technology, medicine, and wisdom. Their violent history would end, replaced by the order and prosperity that came with hegemony membership. Kethvari had no way of knowing that he was about to encounter something that would change everything the hegemony thought they knew about war, courage, and the dangerous unpredictability of a species that had never learned to surrender. The hegemony fleet appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system like a metal storm. 9,500 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the distant light of Sol. Admiral Kethvari watched the tactical displays as his sensors began mapping the human solar system. Primitive as expected, reported the sensor officer. We detect several small space stations around the third planet. One minor outpost on the planet's moon. Various automated probes scattered throughout the system. No significant defensive installations. Kethvari nodded. The intelligence reports had been accurate. Earth's space presence was laughably weak. A few hundred small spacecraft. Most of them clearly designed for research or cargo transport. Nothing that could threaten even his smallest escort ship. Open communications on all frequencies, he ordered. Broadcast the standard surrender demand in all known human languages. The communications officer activated the fleet's transmission array. The message that went out across Earth's solar system was simple and direct. People of Earth, you are now under the protection of the Zalathi hegemony. Cease all military operations and prepare for peaceful integration into our empire. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. You have 1 standard day to respond. Within minutes, Earth's communication networks exploded with activity. Radio signals, data transmissions, and primitive electromagnetic communications flooded the airwaves. The humans were clearly talking to each other. But their response was not what Kethvari expected. Sir, the communications officer said, confusion clear in his voice. They're not broadcasting a surrender. Instead, they seem to be coordinating. Coordinating what? Kethvari asked. Before anyone could answer, the human spacecraft began to move. Instead of fleeing or hiding, they were actually flying toward the hegemony fleet. Long-range sensors showed military installations across Earth powering up weapon systems. Satellites changed their orbits to face the alien fleet. Admiral, the tactical officer reported, human military forces are going to what they call high alert. Their nuclear weapons are being prepared for launch. And sir, they have a lot more spacecraft than we thought. New contacts appeared on the sensors, ships emerging from behind asteroids, battle stations that had been hidden on the dark side of Earth's moon. Construction facilities in the asteroid belt that were suddenly active. The humans had been hiding their true space capabilities. "How many ships do they actually have?" Kethvari demanded. "Approximately 3,000, sir. Still vastly outnumbered, but more than expected." The admiral wasn't worried. 3,000 primitive ships against nearly 10,000 advanced warships was still no contest. He decided to demonstrate the futility of resistance with a show of force. "Send a destroyer squadron to intercept the nearest human vessels," he ordered. "Disable them with minimum force. Show them what they're facing." Squadron Commander Tekval led 12 destroyers toward a group of human ships that were approaching from Earth's direction. The human vessels were small and angular, clearly built for function rather than beauty. They moved with chemical rockets that left bright trails across space. "Human vessels, you are outmatched," Tekval broadcast. "Stand down immediately or face the consequences." The human response was immediate and shocking. Instead of surrendering, they spread out in a complex formation and launched missiles. Dozens of primitive rockets streaked toward the Zelethi destroyers. Tekval laughed. "Activate defensive shields. Let them see how useless their weapons are." The human missiles struck the destroyers' energy barriers and exploded harmlessly. The advanced Zelethi shields could stop asteroid impacts. Chemical explosives barely registered on their sensors. "Return fire," Tekval ordered. "Minimum power. Just disable their engines." The destroyers' plasma cannons fired once each. The energy beams should have crippled the human ships instantly. Instead, something impossible happened. The human vessels scattered in all directions, moving in ways that defied military logic. One human ship dove straight down toward Earth's gravity well, using the planet's pull to accelerate beyond what its engines should have allowed. Another flew directly through a debris field, navigating between chunks of rock with precision that seemed impossible for such primitive technology. A third used the gravity of a nearby moon to whip around in a tight curve that brought it behind the Zelethi formation. "How are they moving like that?" demanded Tekval's weapons officer. "Their pilots must be insane," replied the navigation officer. "No sane being would fly those maneuvers." The human ships regrouped and attacked again. This time, their missiles were different. Instead of simple explosives, they carried electromagnetic pulse warheads. When they detonated against the Zelethi shields, the energy barriers flickered and failed for several seconds. "Impossible," Tekval whispered. "How do they know about our shield frequencies?" The humans pressed their advantage. While the shields were down, they fired kinetic weapons. Solid metal projectiles moving at incredible speeds struck the destroyer hulls. The advanced Zelethi armor held, but warning lights began flashing across the bridge. "Minor hull damage," reported the engineering officer. "Their weapons are crude but effective." More human ships were arriving. They came from all directions, moving in formations that made no tactical sense but somehow worked. When Tekval targeted one group, another would attack from an unexpected angle. When he tried to establish a defensive perimeter, the humans would break it with suicidal charges that forced his ships to scatter. Then something happened that changed everything. One of the human ships, badly damaged and trailing atmosphere, flew directly at Tekval's flagship. The destroyer's weapons tore the small craft apart, but its wreckage slammed into the ship's sensor array. Suddenly, the destroyer was flying blind. "They're using their own destroyed ships as weapons," the tactical officer reported in disbelief. The human pilots weren't retreating when their ships were damaged. They were turning their dying craft into guided missiles. When their weapons failed, they used ramming attacks. When their life support systems were breached, they kept fighting until the very end. "Sir, we're losing the Time's vengeful strike asterisk," the communications officer announced. A human ship collided with their main reactor. Kethvari watched in horror from the command ship as one of his destroyers exploded in a ball of plasma fire. In 3,000 years of hegemony expansion, they had never lost a single ship to a primitive species. Now humans had destroyed a vessel that could have conquered entire star systems. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions," he ordered. "This is not how warfare is supposed to work." But the humans weren't following any rules that the Zelethi understood. Instead of being discouraged by their casualties, they seemed to fight harder. More ships kept arriving from hidden positions throughout the solar system. Each wave of attackers was more aggressive than the last. As the first day of battle ended, Admiral Kethvari stared at the tactical display in confusion. His fleet had suffered 17 ship losses, and dozens more damaged. The humans had lost over 100 vessels, but showed no signs of surrendering. "Admiral," his son Dethvar asked quietly, "why aren't they giving up?" Kethvari had no answer. In all of hegemony history, no species had ever continued fighting when facing impossible odds. The humans should have seen the futility of resistance and surrendered for the good of their people. Instead, they were acting like they planned to fight to the very last ship. And somehow, they were making the Zelathi fleet pay a price that no one had ever imagined possible. Something impossible was happening on Earth, and Admiral Kethvari couldn't understand it. The planet's communication networks buzzed with constant activity. But instead of chaos, he was seeing coordination on a scale that defied everything the intelligence reports had claimed about human society. "Sir, we're intercepting massive amounts of communication traffic," reported the signals officer. "The humans are using some kind of quantum encrypted channels we can't break. But the open channels..." "Admiral, you need to hear this." The bridge speakers crackled with human voices speaking dozens of different languages. Translation software worked to convert them into Zelathi. "Moscow confirms nuclear arsenal retargeting complete. Beijing command, acknowledging new target priorities. Pentagon confirms Operation Guardian Angel is active. NATO Article 5 is now in effect against extraterrestrial threats." Kethvari listened in growing confusion. According to intelligence, these human nations were enemies who had spent decades preparing to destroy each other. Their nuclear weapons were pointed at their own cities. Their military forces trained to fight other humans, not aliens. But within hours of the hegemony fleet's arrival, ancient enemies had become instant allies. Nuclear weapons that were built to target Earth cities were now aimed at the alien fleet. Military commanders who had never spoken to each other were coordinating attacks with precision that veteran Zelathi officers would admire. "How is this possible?" Kethvari asked his intelligence officer. "The reports said they couldn't cooperate on anything." "Sir, it appears we misunderstood human psychology," the officer replied nervously. "What we interpreted as weakness may actually be a survival mechanism. When faced with extinction, they seem to abandon all previous conflicts and unite against the external threat." The admiral studied the tactical display. More human ships were appearing every hour. Not just military vessels, but converted civilian craft. Cargo ships, mounted with weapons, mining vessels equipped with improvised armor. Even passenger transports had joined the fight, their holds filled with missiles instead of people. "Admiral, incoming transmission from Earth," announced the communications officer. The main screen flickered to life, showing a human female in military uniform. Her species was visually similar to Zelathi, but smaller and more fragile-looking. However, her eyes held something that made Kethvari uncomfortable. There was no fear there, only determination. "I am General Sarah Martinez, Supreme Allied Commander of Earth Defense Forces," the human said. "You have one chance to withdraw from our solar system peacefully. Leave now, and we won't pursue you. And we will defend ourselves with every weapon at our disposal." Kethvari activated the reply channel. "General Martinez, you are facing a fleet that has conquered hundreds of worlds. Your forces cannot possibly defeat us. Surrender now, and your people will be treated with respect and dignity." The human's expression didn't change. "Admiral, you clearly don't understand who you're dealing with. Humans don't surrender when our home is threatened. We don't negotiate with invaders, and we don't give up until every last one of us is dead." The transmission ended, leaving the Zelathi bridge in silence. Kethvari had given surrender ultimatums to hundreds of species. Most responded with immediate capitulation. A few tried to negotiate terms. None had ever simply stated they would fight to extinction. "Sir, the humans are deploying something new," the sensor officer reported urgently. Massive structures emerged from behind Earth's moon. Battle stations that dwarfed anything in the intelligence reports. Each one bristled with weapons that energy readings suggested were far more advanced than human technology was supposed to be. "Those readings can't be correct," Kethvari said. "Run full diagnostics on all sensors." "Sensors are functioning perfectly, Admiral. The humans have been hiding their true technological capabilities. Those battle stations are equipped with particle beam weapons, plasma cannons, and something our computers can't identify." More surprises followed. Human ships began using stealth technology that made them nearly invisible to Zalathi sensors. They appeared from nowhere to strike at isolated ships, then vanished before the fleet could respond. Electronic warfare attacks disabled Zalathi communications and weapons systems. Most disturbing of all, human hackers had somehow penetrated the fleet's computer networks. "Admiral, we're losing control of the time's inevitable conquest **, reported the fleet coordinator. "Their computer systems are responding to external commands." On the tactical display, one of the hegemony's heavy cruisers suddenly turned and fired on its own squadron. Chaos erupted as other ships tried to determine if their computers had been compromised. The humans had turned the fleet's greatest strength, its technological superiority, into a vulnerability. But it wasn't just the technology that unnerved Kethvari, it was the humans themselves. Intercepted communications revealed pilots flying suicide missions while singing battle songs, ground crews working in contaminated areas, accepting lethal radiation doses to keep weapons operational, civilian populations evacuating cities not to escape the war, but to deny the invaders any possible hostages. "Sir, I'm receiving reports from Squadron Leader Vektar," the communications officer announced. His ships engaged a group of human vessels near the fourth planet. "The humans, they're not fighting like any species we've encountered." The report was disturbing. Human ships loaded with nuclear weapons had flown directly into Zalathi formations and detonated at point-blank range. The hegemony's shields were designed to protect against distant threats. They couldn't handle weapons exploded inside their own defensive perimeter. "They're using suicide attacks as standard tactics," Vektar reported. "When their ships are disabled, the crews manually detonate their reactors. When their weapons fail, they ram our vessels at full speed. I've never seen anything like it. Admiral, they fight like every single engagement is their final battle." Kethvari realized that the hegemony was facing something completely outside their experience. Every other species they had conquered fought to preserve their people's future. The humans seemed to believe that death in battle was preferable to defeat. "Admiral, priority transmission from the Time's Glorious Purpose *", the communications officer announced. Captain Dekmal appeared on screen, his scaled face showing emotions that Zalathi rarely displayed in battle: fear and confusion. "Admiral, we need immediate reinforcements. The humans have deployed something they call weapons of mass destruction. They're firing nuclear missiles from their planet's surface, hundreds of them. Our shields can stop a few, but there are too many. And sir, they're not trying to disable our ships. They're trying to completely destroy us." The tactical display showed streams of nuclear missiles rising from Earth like deadly fireworks. Each one carried enough destructive power to level a city. The humans were launching them by the hundreds, targeting the largest hegemony ships with overwhelming firepower. "How many nuclear weapons do they have?" Kethvari demanded. "Intelligence estimates over 12,000, Admiral," replied the data officer. "But those estimates may be wrong about everything else." As if summoned by his words, new contacts appeared on long-range sensors. More human ships, emerging from hiding places throughout the asteroid belt. These weren't the crude vessels they had seen before. They were large, heavily armed, and moving with purpose toward the main hegemony fleet. "Admiral," his son Dethvar whispered, "are we going to lose?" For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kethvari honestly didn't know the answer to that question. Admiral Kethvari no longer recognized the battle unfolding around him. 3 days into what should have been a simple conquest, his grand fleet was being systematically torn apart by an enemy that refused to follow any known rules of warfare. "Fleet status report," he demanded, though he dreaded the answer. "Sir, we've lost 2,300 ships," the tactical officer reported with a trembling voice. "Another 800 are severely damaged. The humans have destroyed more of our vessels in 3 days than the hegemony has lost in the past 3 centuries. The admiral stared at the tactical display in disbelief. What had started as an organized formation of 9,500 warships now looked like scattered debris across the solar system. Human forces moved between the gaps like predators hunting wounded prey. "How are they doing this?" he whispered. The answer came from intercepted human communications. The aliens had expected their enemy to break under pressure, to lose coordination as casualties mounted. Instead, the humans fought harder with every loss. Each destroyed ship seemed to make the survivors more determined, more vicious, more willing to sacrifice everything for victory. "Admiral, urgent message from Captain Relthar of the Time's Eternal Dominance *," the communications officer announced. The screen showed a Zalathi bridge in chaos. Smoke filled the air, and emergency lights flashed red. Captain Relthar's face was covered in the blue blood of his species. "Admiral, my ship is surrounded," he gasped. "The humans, they're not trying to capture us. They're hunting us like animals. They've disabled our engines, our weapons, our shields, but instead of demanding surrender, they're moving in for the kill." The transmission cut off as human missiles struck the heavy cruiser. Another dot disappeared from the tactical display. This was the pattern that had emerged across the battlefield. The humans didn't take prisoners. They didn't try to capture valuable alien technology. They simply destroyed everything they could reach with brutal efficiency. When hegemony ships tried to surrender, the humans ignored the white flags and continued their attacks. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Earth Command," reported the communications officer. General Martinez appeared on screen again, but she looked different now. Her uniform was stained with what appeared to be human blood, and her eyes held a coldness that made Kethvari's scales crawl. "Admiral, this is your final warning," she said without any diplomatic politeness. "Order your fleet to withdraw immediately. You have already lost. Continue this fight, and we will follow your surviving ships back to your home worlds." "General, surely we can negotiate," Kethvari replied desperately. "The hegemony is willing to discuss terms." The human's laugh was like ice. "Admiral, you came to our home with nearly 10,000 warships. You planned to conquer our world and enslave our people. There are no terms to negotiate. There is only your complete defeat or your total destruction. Choose." The transmission ended. Around the bridge, Zalathi officers looked at each other with growing panic. They had been trained for conquest, not for facing an enemy that treated warfare as total commitment. "Admiral, priority alert from Squadron Commander Mekval," announced the tactical officer. "His formation is under attack by human forces, using some kind of new strategy." The report was horrifying. The humans had begun targeting command ships specifically. They identified fleet leaders through communication intercepts and focused overwhelming firepower on destroying command structures. Without clear orders, individual Zalathi captains were reverting to defensive tactics that made them easy targets. But the worst part was how the humans were using their own casualties as weapons. Damaged human ships didn't retreat for repairs. Instead, they positioned themselves as improvised mines in areas where hegemony vessels might pass. When Zalathi ships approached, the disabled human craft detonated their reactors in coordinated explosions. "They're turning their own dead into traps," reported the intelligence officer. "Our ships are afraid to approach any debris field because it might contain human vessels waiting to explode." The psychological effect was devastating. Zalathi crews were elite professionals trained for precise, clean warfare. They weren't prepared for enemies who treated death as just another weapon to be used against their foes. "Admiral, incoming data burst from the reconnaissance fleet," the communications officer said. "They've discovered something disturbing about human capabilities." The intelligence report revealed the truth that changed everything. The humans hadn't just been hiding their space technology. They had been deliberately studying alien contact scenarios for decades. Every piece of equipment, every tactic, every strategy they were using had been prepared specifically for fighting technologically superior invaders. They call it the Independence Day Protocol. the intelligence officer explained. Based on their entertainment media, they have been planning for alien invasion for over a century. Every major human nation has developed contingency plans for fighting extraterrestrial forces. The humans had studied every possible weakness in advanced civilizations. Centralized command structures, reliance on energy shields, predictable tactical doctrine, psychological assumptions about inferior species. They had built their entire defense strategy around exploiting these vulnerabilities. Sir. Emergency transmission from the Times Glorious Victory, *. The communications officer announced urgently. Captain Zekthor appeared on screen, his ship's bridge dark except for emergency lighting. Admiral. The humans have done something to our computer systems, he reported. Our weapons are targeting our own ships. Our navigation is sending us into asteroid fields. Our life support is cycling randomly. How are they inside our networks? The answer came from human prisoners taken early in the battle. Under interrogation, they had revealed something that chilled Kethvari to his core. Human computer specialists called hackers had been preparing for this moment for decades. They had studied every piece of alien technology that had ever appeared in their fiction. Every possible vulnerability in advanced computer systems. They treat information warfare as a primary battle strategy, not a support function, the interrogation report concluded. Their hackers view our computer networks as just another battlefield to be conquered. The hegemony's technological superiority had become its greatest weakness. Ships designed to operate in a civilized galaxy where warfare followed established rules had no defense against opponents who created new rules in real time. Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting massive human formations moving to encircle our position, the sensor officer reported. They're not trying to push us out of the system. They're trying to trap us here. Kethvari studied the tactical display with growing horror. The humans had been pretending to fight defensively while actually maneuvering the hegemony fleet into a giant trap. Now they were closing the net. Sir, his son Dethvar asked quietly, what do we do now? For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kethvari gave an order that no hegemony commander had ever given before. Signal all ships, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Prepare for full retreat, but even as he spoke, he knew it might already be too late. The humans had taught the galaxy's greatest military force a lesson that would echo through history. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one that refuses to lose. Commander Vethlan, of the light cruiser times, inevitable judgment times, watched 17 ships limping away from Earth's solar system and tried to understand how everything had gone so terribly wrong. He was now the highest-ranking officer in what remained of the Third Grand Fleet. Admiral Kethvari was dead, along with nearly every other senior commander. His flagship had been destroyed when human forces targeted the command structure with frightening precision. The retreat had not been organized. It had been a panicked flight. Ships scattered in all directions as human forces pursued them relentlessly. Those that made it to the edge of the solar system had done so only because the humans finally stopped chasing them. But even in retreat, the humans had sent a message that would haunt Vethlan's dreams forever. As the surviving Zalathi ships fled toward hyperspace jump points, human voices followed them on open communication channels. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We're letting you leave so you can tell others what happens when someone threatens our home. But if any of you ever come back, if you bring friends, if you even think about returning to our system, we will be waiting. And next time, we won't let any of you leave. The 17 surviving ships jumped to hyperspace carrying a cargo more precious than any treasure. The complete record of humanity's impossible victory. Vethlan spent the long journey home compiling the official report, knowing that it would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. Commander, his navigation officer called out. We're 3 weeks into the journey. The crew is asking, what do we tell High Command when we arrive? Vethlan didn't answer immediately. How could he explain that the galaxy's most powerful military force had been destroyed by a species that had barely achieved spaceflight? How could he describe the humans' fighting style to commanders who had never faced an enemy that treated death as a tactical advantage? We tell them the truth, he finally replied. All of it. The truth was disturbing beyond anything in hegemony experience. The humans had not won through superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They had won by being willing to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, to protect their home. Every human pilot seemed to view their individual death as acceptable if it weakened the enemy even slightly. The intelligence failures had been catastrophic. The hegemony's scouts had completely misunderstood human psychology. What appeared to be primitive tribalism was actually humanity's greatest strength. Their ability to unite instantly when facing an external threat. Nations that had been enemies for centuries became perfect allies within hours of the alien fleet's arrival. More disturbing was the revelation that humans had been preparing for alien invasion for decades. Their entertainment industry had explored every possible scenario of contact with hostile aliens. Their military planners had developed strategies for fighting technologically superior enemies. Their computer specialists had studied theoretical vulnerabilities in advanced alien systems. They turned our strengths into weaknesses, Vethlon dictated to his personal log. Our centralized command structure became a target for concentrated attacks. Our energy shields were useless against weapons detonated inside our defensive perimeter. Our technological superiority made us dependent on computer systems they could exploit. But the most disturbing discovery was how the humans viewed warfare itself. The hegemony fought to achieve political objectives with minimal casualties. Humans fought for survival with total commitment. When facing extinction, they had transformed their entire civilization into a weapon pointed at the alien fleet. Commander, incoming message from the Times Distant Thunder *, the communications officer announced. Captain Yelvar appeared on screen, her face showing the emotional exhaustion that all survivors shared. Vethlan, my crew is asking about our destination, she said. Some of the ships want to find a colony world and hide rather than return to hegemony space. They're afraid of what High Command will do to us for this defeat. Vethlan understood their fear. No hegemony fleet had ever suffered such catastrophic losses. The survivors would face interrogation, possible court-martial, and the shame of being associated with the worst military disaster in their species' history. We return home, he replied firmly. The galaxy needs to know what we learned about humanity. This information could prevent future disasters. The report Vethlan was preparing would become known as the Terran Assessment, the most important military intelligence document in galactic history. It would fundamentally change how every civilized species viewed both warfare and humanity. Key findings included: humans possessed deliberately concealed technological capabilities far beyond initial estimates. They practiced strategic deception on a scale never before encountered. Most critically, they viewed warfare not as politics by other means, but as total commitment, where victory justified any sacrifice. The report's most famous passage would be quoted in military academies across the galaxy for generations. Humanity represents a species that becomes more dangerous when threatened. We came to conquer a primitive world, and instead awakened something that treats extinction as merely another tactical option. The hegemony must never again underestimate a species that makes weapons from their own mortality. 3 months into the journey home, disturbing news reached the survivors through long-range communications. Word of the disaster had somehow spread throughout known space. Some hegemony member worlds were questioning the Empire's military invincibility. Others were forming defensive alliances. A few had declared independence outright. Sir. Message from Hegemony High Command. The communications officer reported nervously. Supreme Admiral Jektar appeared on screen, his ancient face showing emotions that Vethlan had never seen before. Confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. Commander Vethlan, initial reports of the Earth operation are difficult to believe, the Supreme Admiral said carefully. You will proceed directly to Capital Station upon your return. Prepare for immediate debriefing by the Intelligence Council. And Commander, I hope for everyone's sake that these reports are somehow inaccurate. The transmission ended, leaving Vethlan to contemplate the impossible task ahead. How could he convince the galaxy's leaders that a primitive species had destroyed the most powerful fleet ever assembled? How could he explain that humanity's apparent weaknesses were actually their greatest strengths? As the surviving ships continued their long journey home, Earth itself had become something new in galactic consciousness. No longer just another primitive world to be conquered. It was now a legend, A small blue planet where an impossible victory had proven that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one with nothing left to lose. The humans had sent a message that would echo across the galaxy for millennia. They were not alone in the universe, but they were absolutely unwilling to surrender their freedom to anyone. Any species that threatened Earth would face opponents who fought with the fury of the desperate and the precision of the prepared. 17 ships had escaped to tell the tale. Behind them, humanity continued building, learning, and preparing for whatever the galaxy might send next. They had proven that advanced technology and overwhelming numbers meant nothing when facing an enemy that simply refused to lose. The age of easy conquest was over. The galaxy would never be the same.